This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're pleased to be joined by Daniel Ruddy. He's a marketing consultant for Fortune 500 companies and has put together a book of writings by Theodore Roosevelt. It's entitled Theodore Roosevelt's History of the United States. The writings of the 26th president illustrate his ideas about the nation's early days and his own times. We should also mention that Daniel Ruddy is the brother of Newsmax CEO Christopher Ruddy. Welcome to Newsmax, Daniel.
Ashley, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is the book here. Daniel, what inspired you to write this?
Well, I've always been a really big fan of Theodore Roosevelt, and I started, just in my own general reading of American history, I kept on coming across his opinions in other books. I wanted to understand more. So I went in search of a book to try to answer some of those questions I had, and I couldn't find a book that dealt with this subject specifically, Roosevelt as a historian. So I investigated further, and I thought, wow, this would be a great idea for a book, because Theodore Roosevelt was not only a president, famous president, he was also a very well-known historian, and a major one. I wanted to bring Theodore Roosevelt to life. I wanted to, in my own mind, in my imagination, I wanted to sit with him on the veranda at Sagamore Hill and talk about American history, because he obviously had a passion for it. He was very opinionated. He would shoot from the hip. He would say what he thought. You know, we live in a politically correct era where everyone is walking on eggshells, worried about what they're going to say. And Theodore Roosevelt, you know, he didn't worry about those things.
Now, when historians and the general public talk about great American presidents, Roosevelt's name always comes up. Why do you think that is?
Well, he was one of these presidents. You can kind of group American presidents into two separate groupings. One, kind of presidents who are time servers, who do their duty, who serve well. And then there are these presidents who are pivotal, or they change the direction of American history. And Roosevelt was one of those. In a way, he was one of the founding fathers of modern America, because he was the president at the beginning of the 20th century when the nation was undergoing all these changes. And he really expanded the power of government. You know, really brought the United States into the modern era in a very bold and confident way.
Now, in the book, you let Roosevelt tell the story of American history in his own words, from the Revolution right up to into the 20th century. He had some very strong opinions of some other presidents, like Thomas Jefferson. He didn't like him. Why not?
He hated Jefferson. You know, that kind of cuts against the grain of the way we've been taught, because Jefferson is really a revered figure. And rightly so, I might add. A lot of Theodore Roosevelt's criticisms of Jefferson are a little bit unfair. But he didn't like Jefferson because he saw Jefferson as a disruptive influence during the founding period. Jefferson is the great apostle of liberty for the United States, you know, the one who really promoted the idea of personal individual freedom. And Jefferson had some ideas that really served to kind of disunite the country. One of them was this notion of nullification. Nullification was the idea that individual states could basically declare federal law null and void. Jefferson had seen the reaction to the Alien and Sedition laws and did not, you know, approve of what was happening there. So he created this he wrote this document in secret called the Kentucky Resolutions, which brought out this doctrine of nullification. And that in turn led to the Civil War, because that was used as the intellectual justification to dissolve the Union in 1861. And of course, that was a catastrophic event for the United States. And Roosevelt, and by the way, he wasn't alone. There are many others of that time period who blamed Jefferson as well, you know, for basically planting this seed that germinated, you know, 60 years later and almost destroyed the country.
What did he think about Abraham Lincoln?
Glad you asked that question. The key to understanding Theodore Roosevelt is Abraham Lincoln. Everything Roosevelt did was really in Lincoln's spirit. He was trying to basically continue Lincoln's legacy. Lincoln was a radical, Roosevelt said, because Lincoln was trying to solve problems, and the great challenge of Lincoln's generation was, of course, slavery. Roosevelt was trying to do the same thing. The great problem of his generation, as we've talked a little bit about, is the labor unrest, this great gap in wealth between the really wealthy elite industrialists, the so-called robber barons, and the mass of the American working force. So Roosevelt was really trying to continue Lincoln's legacy. He wanted the Republican Party to be the party of Lincoln. And in the 1890s, the Republican Party had become the party of big money. The McKinley campaign, even Grover Cleveland and the opposite party, their campaigns had been funded by the big industrialists, by Rockefeller, and so forth. And Roosevelt said he wanted to take the Republican Party back and turn it again into the Lincoln Party. And but really, he revered Lincoln. Lincoln was his great hero. One interesting thing, though, and this shows, one criticism potentially about this book is that when you read history from a partisan point of view, it will be biased, because Roosevelt was a political figure. He was a Republican. So therefore, you might think, oh, well, of course he'll hate Jefferson. Jefferson was a Democrat. It's really not fair criticism. But Roosevelt was fair. He had a standard by which he judged historical figures. And you can see that in the fact that he could criticize Abraham Lincoln as great hero. Lincoln had allowed a lot of corruption to go on during the Civil War because Lincoln was worried about much bigger problems, defeating the South, winning the conflict. And Lincoln made a lot of compromises to do that. And Roosevelt was critical of that. This was really no small criticism, because that corruption that began in the Civil War really spread afterwards. And in the period of Roosevelt's adult life, it was really one of the predominant themes, one of the predominant issues in American life, the corruption, politics, and civil service. There were scandals galore.
Well, back then, of course, there were no term limits for presidents. He ran a third time. And he ran the third time as a member of the Bull Moose Party. Why did he leave the Republican Party? You mentioned that in your book, but
yeah,
why?
Well, this has a lot to do with Lincoln as well. Roosevelt wanted to transform the party, the Republican Party, from this party of big money. The Republican Party even today has this image of the country club Republican, the rich fat cats, and Roosevelt was a progressive. And he wanted to make the party more of a populist party, more of the party of the common man. And he thought Lincoln did that, and he tried to do that when he was president. And then when his handpicked successor, William Howard Taft, entered the White House, Roosevelt was very disappointed because he felt that Taft had not continued his legacy. And there are a number of reasons, with events and with figures in politics, it's usually a complicated thing. We should always beware of a single cause to explain something, because things are usually more complex. There's usually multiple factors at play. I think that was the case in 1912. There are a number of reasons why Roosevelt ran. Part of it was hubris. I think the adulation went to his head. He had been out of the limelight for 3 or 4 years, and he wanted to recapture that magic which he had experienced as president. That's part of it. Remaking the Republican Party. He was angry as well. In 1912, he had tried to win the Republican nomination, and he felt it was stolen. And he was very bitter and angry. And part of the reason he ran as a third-party candidate, he wanted to lash out at his, the so-called party bosses who had stolen the nomination from him.
On health care, now you've said that claims by supporters of the Democrats' overhaul that Roosevelt was the first president to call for nationalized health care, advocated, distorts the actual truth. Please explain it.
Yeah, well, you have to go back to, and a lot of times we take what's happening in our own period and project it backwards. Back in the beginning of the 20th century, the whole healthcare system of the United States was in a very early stage of development. There weren't many hospitals even. The local doctor in the town would service the community. So it wasn't anything like it is today with big insurance companies. It's much more complicated. So Roosevelt wasn't trying to create a national healthcare system. He just wanted to make it more efficient. In 1912, he ran on a platform which talked a little bit about healthcare. There's a plank in the Bull Moose Party platform of 1912, which states the idea that we should organize this a little bit better, but organize the existing system as it is. Roosevelt was really much more concerned with the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, of that era, which is simple things today, the things we take for granted, like workman's compensation. Someone working in a steel mill who loses their arm in an accident. Roosevelt wanted that worker taken care of, and obviously that's the right thing to do. But back then, those laws that we have in place today weren't there, and he wanted to put them in place. Things like a 8-hour workday, child labor laws, workman's compensation, which I just mentioned, things like that. So the idea to somehow say that he was therefore for a national healthcare system along the lines that Obama and his supporters have advocated, that's really a distortion.
Daniel, understand you gave a lecture about this book somewhere, huh?
That's correct. When the book first came out, I gave a 90-minute talk on the book, which C-SPAN broadcast. And now if people, of course, want to learn more, they can get the book and read it. But before they do that, if they'd like to see more or hear me talk more about it, they can go to the C-SPAN Book TV website and just search my name, Daniel Ruddy, and the talk should come up and they can watch it on their computer. It goes for about 90 minutes.
Again, the title of the book, Theodore Roosevelt's History of the United States. Daniel Ruddy, lots of luck with it, and thanks for coming by to talk with us,
Thanks,
sir.
Ashley.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.